My crush became my stepsister. I scared off every guy until she figured out why. I'd been in love with Mia since my sophomore year of college. She sat 2 rows ahead of me in organic chemistry and always wore this yellow headband. Every Tuesday, she'd turn around to borrow a pen, even though I knew she had like 10 in her backpack. I never said anything because talking to her made me forget how to form sentences. My friends said I was pathetic, but I didn't care. I had this whole plan to ask her out after finals. Then my mom started acting weird, singing in the shower, actually cooking dinner instead of ordering pizza, checking her phone every 5 seconds with this goofy smile. She'd been single since my dad left 8 years ago, so seeing her happy was amazing. She finally told me she'd met someone at her book club, said his name was Robert, and he was perfect, and she wanted me to meet him and his daughter. I was thrilled for her. She deserved someone good after everything. She planned this whole dinner at a nice steakhouse downtown, said both families should meet properly. I wore the only dress shirt I owned and practiced being the supportive son in the mirror. Got there early with Mom to get a table. She was practically glowing. Then Robert walked in, and I recognized him immediately. He was Mia's dad. He'd dropped her off at campus a few times. My brain stopped working when I saw Mia walk in behind him, wearing this blue dress I'd never seen before. She spotted me and her whole face lit up. She actually ran over and hugged me, going on about what a crazy coincidence this was. Said we were going to be the best siblings ever. Called me her bonus brother. I just stood there like an idiot while she told our parents how we already knew each other from school. My mom was ecstatic, saying it was meant to be. Robert was shaking my hand, talking about how nice it would be for Mia to have a brother. Meanwhile, I wanted to disappear into the floor. The whole dinner, Mia kept making plans. We could carpool to campus together, study together at home. She'd help me with chemistry if I helped her with calculus. She was drawing up this whole perfect sibling dynamic while I sat there dying inside. Mom and Robert were talking about moving in together by next semester. Mia grabbed my hand under the table and squeezed it, whispering that she'd always wanted a brother. I excused myself and hid in the bathroom for 15 minutes. After that night, everything got worse. Mia started texting me constantly, sending memes about having siblings, asking what my favorite breakfast was when we'd lived together, and wanting to hang out between classes. I started being mean to her because I didn't know what else to do. When she'd wait for me after class, I'd walk right past her. When she saved me a seat at lunch, I'd sit somewhere else. She kept trying, though. Left notes on my car asking if she'd done something wrong. I'd crumple them up without responding. The confusion on her face killed me, but I couldn't explain that I'd spent 2 years fantasizing about our wedding, and now she wanted to paint my nails and have movie nights as siblings. 2 months later, our parents got married at the city hall. Mia was the maid of honor, and I was the best man. She tried to link arms with me for photos, and I pretended I needed to fix my tie. The photographer kept telling us to stand closer, and Mia would laugh, saying I was camera shy while I wanted to scream. We moved into Robert's house the next week. Mia had decorated my room with posters she thought I'd like and a welcome home sign. She'd spent hours on it. I took it all down while she was in class, and she found it in the trash. She cried, and I felt horrible, but I told her I just wanted my space. She stopped trying to be nice after that. 2 years of living in the same house and barely talking. She'd eat breakfast in her room. I'd wait until she left to use the kitchen. Our parents thought we just needed time to adjust. Then one night she brought home this guy named Justin. Said he was her study partner, but the way he looked at her made it obvious. She introduced him as her potential boyfriend and asked what I thought as her brother. I said he looked like he failed his driver's test 3 times. He laughed nervously. Mia glared at me. Justin came over for dinner that Friday. I spent the whole meal asking him increasingly ridiculous questions. Did he know how to change a tire? What were his thoughts on the economic crisis in Bulgaria? Had he ever been arrested? Mia kept kicking me under the table. When Justin went to the bathroom, she asked what my problem was. I said I was just being a protective brother. She said I'd never acted like a brother before, so why start now? That hit different. Saturday, our parents went to a couple's resort for a week. Left us alone in the house for the first time. Justin stayed for dinner and I couldn't help myself. I asked him what his major was, and when he said business administration, I mentioned how everyone doing that nowadays just wanted easy money without real skills. Mia's fork stopped halfway to her mouth and she stared at me with this look that should have made me shut up, but I kept going. I asked about his car, a silver Toyota, and said it looked like the kind of thing someone who couldn't commit to a real decision would drive. Justin laughed nervously and tried to change the subject to the weather, but I circled back to his haircut, which was perfectly normal, and suggested he looked like he was trying too hard to be trendy. Mia kicked me under the table hard enough that I felt it through my shoe, but the jealousy burning in my chest wouldn't let me stop. I brought up how business majors never actually learned anything practical and asked if he even knew how to file taxes or change his own oil. Justin's smile got tighter with each question, and Mia's face turned red, her knuckles white around her fork. I asked about his internship plans, and when he mentioned retail management, I said that sounded like a dead-end career path for people without ambition. Mia stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor and excused herself to the bathroom, leaving Justin and me sitting in painful silence. Justin left around 9 after Mia came back and barely spoke to him for the rest of the meal. I heard the front door close and started loading the dishwasher, scraping plates harder than necessary. Mia appeared in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed and asked what my problem was with Justin specifically. Her voice came out tight and controlled, like she was trying not to yell. I told her he seemed fake, too polished, like he was putting on an act to impress her. She deserved better than some guy who probably rehearsed his answers in the mirror. Mia stepped closer, and her eyes looked wet, but she wasn't crying yet. She asked why I suddenly cared about what she deserved when I'd spent 2 years making her feel unwelcome in her own home. I put down the plate I was holding and said I was just being protective, that brothers look out for their sisters. Mia laughed, and it sounded wrong, bitter and sharp. She said I'd never cared about what she deserved before, so why start now with her dating life? The hurt in her voice made my stomach twist, but I couldn't back down now. I told her that's what brothers do. They protect their sisters from guys with bad intentions. Justin had bad intentions written all over him with his perfect hair and rehearsed small talk. She stepped even closer, and I could see her hands shaking. She reminded me that when we first moved in together, she'd spent hours decorating my room with posters and a welcome home sign because she wanted me to feel comfortable. I took it all down and threw it in the trash where she found it. Her voice cracked when she said I could drop the concerned brother act because I'd never acted like a brother before. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. She waited for maybe 5 seconds and then walked away, leaving me alone with the dishes and this heavy feeling in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about Justin's hand on Mia's shoulder during dinner. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them sitting close together, his arm casual across the back of her chair, her smiling at something he said. My chest got tight with this awful mixture of jealousy and self-hatred that made me want to punch something. I kept replaying the dinner in my head, hearing my own voice saying those terrible things about Justin's major and his car and his hair. Mia's face when she looked at me, that combination of anger and confusion and hurt, played on repeat behind my eyelids. I rolled over and tried to think about something else, but my brain kept going back to the way Justin looked at her, like she was the only person in the room. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and just lay there feeling miserable, knowing I deserved every second of it. The next morning, I woke up to an empty house. Mia's door was already open and her bed was made, which meant she'd left early. My phone buzzed with a text from her saying she was studying at the library all day. I read it 3 times looking for any hint of emotion, but it was just flat and factual. I knew she was avoiding me and I deserved it completely. The house felt wrong without her in it, too quiet and too big. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table where we'd eaten dinner last night, remembering how she'd kicked me under the table trying to get me to stop. The empty chair across from me where she usually sat for breakfast made my stomach hurt. I tried to tell myself this was better, that distance would help kill whatever feelings I had left, but the loneliness pressed down on me anyway. I opened my calculus textbook and tried to focus on problem sets, but the numbers blurred together. After 20 minutes of reading the same equation over and over, I gave up and opened my phone. I told myself I was just checking social media normally, but I went straight to Mia's profile. She'd posted photos from yesterday, her and friends at the dining hall, everyone laughing at something off camera. I scrolled down and found a new picture from the coffee shop, her and Justin sitting across from each other with matching lattes. They were both laughing, and his hand was reaching across the table toward hers. The timestamp said yesterday afternoon, before he came over for dinner. I stared at that photo until my eyes hurt, studying every detail. The way she smiled at him, genuine and open, so different from how she looked at me now. My chest felt hollow and sick at the same time. I closed the app and opened it again 5 minutes later, torturing myself with that same photo. Mia came home around dinner time carrying a paper bag from the Thai place near campus. She walked past me in the living room without saying anything and went to her room. I heard her door close, not slam, but close firmly, and then silence. I sat there for a few minutes before going to the kitchen and making a sandwich. We ate in separate rooms, and the silence in the house was worse than arguing. At least when we fought, there was something between us, even if it was anger. This felt like a cold wall that I'd built brick by brick with every mean comment and rejection over the past 2 years. I couldn't figure out how to tear it down without explaining why I'd built it in the first place. My sandwich tasted like cardboard, but I forced myself to eat it, chewing slowly in the empty kitchen while Mia stayed hidden in her room. Around 10 that night, I heard Mia's voice through her bedroom door. She was on the phone with someone, laughing at something they said. The sound of her being happy with someone else made my hands clench into fists. I turned up my music to drown it out, some angry rock playlist that matched my mood. But even with the volume high, I could still hear her laugh occasionally, bright and genuine in a way she never sounded around me anymore. I lay on my bed and stared at my phone, not really seeing whatever was on the screen. The music pounded in my ears, but it couldn't stop me from straining to hear her voice through the wall. After an hour, her light went off and the house went quiet except for my music. I turned it down and lay in the dark, feeling pathetic and angry and sad all mixed together. Justin showed up again the next afternoon. I was in the living room pretending to study when the doorbell rang. I got to the door before Mia could, opening it to find Justin standing there with his backpack and that same friendly smile. I told him Mia was busy with family stuff and maybe he should call first next time. I tried to make my voice sound intimidating even though he was like 3 inches taller than me. His smile faltered and he pulled out his phone, probably to text Mia. I stood in the doorway blocking his view into the house and crossed my arms. He asked if everything was okay, and I said everything was fine. We just had family things to handle today. Behind me, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Mia came down the stairs behind me, and I felt her hand on my shoulder, firm enough to make me step aside. She looked at Justin with this apologetic smile that made my chest tighten and told him to ignore me, that I was having a weird day. The way she said it made it clear she was done with my behavior. She held the door wider and invited him inside, gesturing toward the stairs with this deliberate politeness that felt like a slap. Justin glanced between us, clearly uncomfortable, but followed her up to her room. She left the door open but positioned herself so I couldn't see inside without being obvious about it. I stood in the hallway for a minute after they disappeared, my hands still clenched at my sides. The house felt too quiet except for their voices drifting down, too soft for me to make out words. I went to the kitchen and opened the fridge, stared at the contents without seeing anything, closed it again. Walked to the living room and sat on the couch, picked up my phone, put it down, got up and went to get water I didn't want. I found myself walking past Mia's room on the way back, moving slowly, trying to look casual even though no one was watching. Through the open door I could see them on her bed, textbooks spread around them, sitting close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Justin was pointing at something in his notebook, and Mia was leaning in to look, her hair falling forward. They looked comfortable together, natural, like they'd done this 100 times. My stomach hurt watching them. I kept walking, went to my room, lasted maybe 5 minutes before I needed to check on something downstairs. Took the long way back past her door again. This time Justin was laughing at something she said. His whole face lit up, and she was smiling back at him with this genuine happiness I hadn't seen her direct at me in 2 years. I made it back to my room and lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling and feeling pathetic. An hour later I heard footsteps on the stairs and jumped up, opened my door in time to see Justin heading down. I followed him, trying to look like I just happened to be coming downstairs too. At the front door he turned and thanked me for having him over, his voice friendly but careful, like he was dealing with an unpredictable animal. I managed to say something normal back and he left. Mia didn't come down. I waited in the living room, expecting her to appear, to yell at me or demand an explanation, but her door stayed closed. The silence stretched on, and I turned on the TV just for noise, not watching whatever was on. Around dinner time, I went upstairs and stood outside her door, raising my hand to knock, then lowering it again. I could hear her moving around inside, the soft sounds of her existing in a space I wasn't welcome in. I stood there like an idiot for probably 3 minutes before giving up and going back downstairs. Made myself a sandwich I barely tasted. Went back upstairs later and stood outside her door again, this time with some half-formed idea of apologizing, but I couldn't figure out what to say that wouldn't make everything worse. Sorry I'm in love with you, but you're my sister now didn't seem like it would help. I went to bed without talking to her, lay awake listening for any sound from her room. 3 days passed like that, the house feeling bigger and emptier even though we were both in it. I'd hear her moving around, timing my own movements to avoid running into her. She started leaving for campus earlier, coming home later. Our parents called every day and I told them everything was fine while Mia stayed in her room. The 4th morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing with texts from friends, ignored them all, went downstairs to find Mia already in the kitchen making coffee. She was wearing one of her biology class shirts and her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. I froze in the doorway, not sure if I should leave or try to act normal. She glanced at me, her face carefully blank, and mentioned that someone named Tyler from her biology class had texted, asking if she wanted to join a study group. The way she said it felt like a test, her eyes watching my reaction. I felt my jaw clench before I could stop it. I asked what his deal was, trying to keep my voice casual and failing. Why was he suddenly interested in studying with her? Did she even know him that well? Mia set her coffee mug down slowly and stared at me with this new expression, her head tilted slightly like she was examining something under a microscope. She told me Tyler was just a classmate, and it was a group of 5 people, not a date. But I could hear my own voice getting defensive anyway. I suggested that people in her classes might have reasons beyond studying for wanting to spend time with her. That she should be careful about who she trusted and what their real intentions were. The words came out harsher than I meant them. Mia asked me directly if I was going to question every guy who talked to her. Before I could answer, she added that I'd been doing this for 2 years, and she was just now realizing it. her voice getting louder with each word. She started listing examples, times I'd scared off guys at campus events by being cold or making them uncomfortable. Gave unfriendly looks to male friends who tried to talk to her. Made her feel weird about normal social interactions by hovering or making comments. I stood there feeling exposed and horrible as she kept going, realizing she'd been keeping track of all of it, watching my behavior and cataloging every instance. I tried to backtrack, stammering something about just being concerned, but she was on a roll now. She brought up James from her freshman English class, who'd asked her to a movie, and then never spoke to her again after meeting me. Brought up William from the campus environmental club, who'd stopped showing up to meetings after I'd joined. Brought up 3 other guys whose names I barely remembered, but whose interest in her I'd apparently killed without fully acknowledging what I was doing. Her voice cracked on the last one, and I felt sick. She pulled out her phone and canceled the study group right there in front of me, typing quickly with shaking hands. Told Tyler something came up and she couldn't make it. Then she went back to her room and I heard the door close, not slam but close with this awful finality. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the coffee maker, feeling like the worst person alive. Hours later I heard her voice through her door, talking to someone on the phone in low, angry tones. Probably Natasha, her friend from the dorms who'd never liked me. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was clear enough. That evening I decided to try making dinner. Some kind of peace offering, even though I knew it wouldn't fix anything. I found Mom's pasta recipe card and tried to follow it, but nothing went right. The sauce was too watery, and then I added too much salt trying to fix it. Burned the garlic. Overcooked the pasta until it was mushy. The kitchen looked like a disaster zone. Pots everywhere. Red sauce splattered on the counter. I was standing there staring at the mess when I heard footsteps behind me. Mia came into the kitchen, looked at the chaos I'd created, and something in her face softened slightly. She actually laughed, just a little. This quiet sound that wasn't quite happy but wasn't angry either. She moved past me and started fixing what I'd ruined, dumping out the oversalted sauce and starting over, showing me how to actually cook the pasta properly. We worked side by side in careful silence, not talking but not fighting either, and for a few minutes it almost felt like we could be normal around each other. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table with plates of pasta between us. The silence felt heavy, but not quite as bad as the yelling from earlier. I kept my eyes on my food and pushed the noodles around with my fork. Mia ate slowly, taking small bites and not looking up. The clock on the wall ticked loud enough that I noticed each second passing. I wanted to say something about how I'd acted, about making dinner into a disaster before she helped me fix it. The words sat in my throat but wouldn't come out. Every time I opened my mouth to speak, my brain reminded me of all the ways an apology could go wrong. She might ask questions I couldn't answer. She might want to talk about why I'd been treating her badly for 2 years. I closed my mouth again and took another bite. Mia didn't push me to talk. She just ate her pasta and occasionally glanced toward the window. Her phone buzzed on the table and she picked it up, reading whatever message had come through. Her whole face changed. The tiredness disappeared and she smiled, this genuine happy expression I hadn't seen directed at anything involving me in forever. She typed back quickly, her fingers moving fast across the screen. I watched her face stay lit up as she read the response. My chest got tight and my hands gripped the fork too hard. I knew without asking that Justin had texted her. The way she bit her lip while typing, the little laugh she made reading his reply, it all screamed that she was talking to him. The jealousy hit me like getting punched in the stomach. I pushed my chair back from the table, the legs scraping loud against the floor. Mia looked up, her smile fading when she saw my face. I mumbled something about needing to finish homework and grabbed my plate. Behind me I heard her sigh, this exhausted sound that made me feel worse, but I kept walking to my room anyway. The next morning I woke up to the doorbell ringing. I checked my phone and saw it was barely 9. Our parents weren't due back for days and Mia never had people over this early. I pulled on a shirt and went downstairs, still half asleep. When I opened the door, Natasha stood there looking at me with this evaluating expression. She'd been Mia's friend since freshman year and had never liked me much. Now she stared at me like she was trying to see inside my head and figure out what my problem was. I asked if Mia knew she was coming. Natasha said Mia had texted her last night asking her to come over this morning. She walked past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. I followed her up the stairs and watched her go straight to Mia's room. The door closed behind her with a firm click. I stood in the hallway for a minute, then went back to my room. Through the wall I could hear their voices, low and serious. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was clear. Mia was upset, and Natasha was listening. An hour passed. I tried to focus on reading for my history class, but kept looking at the clock. Their voices continued, sometimes getting louder, sometimes dropping to whispers. Finally I heard footsteps and the door opening. I stayed in my room but left my door cracked so I could hear. Natasha's voice carried down the hallway telling Mia she'd call her later. I heard them hug and say goodbye. Then Natasha's footsteps came toward the stairs. I thought she'd just leave, but instead she stopped outside my door. She knocked twice and pushed it open before I could say anything. She stood in my doorway with her arms crossed and looked at me like I was something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. She told me that Mia was one of the kindest people she knew, that Mia didn't deserve to be treated like she was a problem that needed solving. The way Natasha said it made clear she knew way more about what was going on than I wanted her to. She didn't wait for me to respond, just turned and left. I heard her go down the stairs and the front door close. My hands were shaking. I sat on my bed staring at the wall, knowing that whatever Mia had told Natasha meant things were about to change. 20 minutes later, Mia knocked on my door. She didn't wait for permission either, just opened it and told me we needed to talk in the living room. Her voice was different, harder somehow. I followed her downstairs and sat on the couch while she stood in front of me. She said Natasha had helped her see something she should have noticed before. That every guy who'd shown interest in her for the past 2 years had mysteriously backed off after interacting with me. She started listing names. James from her freshman English class who'd asked her to a movie. William from the environmental club. 3 other guys whose names I barely remembered. With each name, she said, I felt my stomach drop further. I'd known I was scaring these guys away, but hearing her list them all made me realize how bad it actually was. She asked why every single one of them had suddenly lost interest right after meeting me. Her eyes were filling with tears and I felt like the worst person on earth. I tried to think of something to say that wasn't a lie but also wasn't the truth. My mouth opened but nothing came out at first. Then I stammered something about not wanting her to get hurt by guys with bad intentions. She laughed and it was the most broken sound I'd ever heard. She said I'd hurt her more than any of those guys ever could have. That she was done trying to understand why I acted the way I did. Her voice cracked and I wanted to disappear. She told me Justin was coming over tomorrow and I needed to be civil to him. If I couldn't manage that, she'd call our parents and ask them to come home early. The ultimatum sat between us and I nodded because I didn't trust myself to speak. She looked at me for another long moment, then went back upstairs to her room. I sat on the couch alone, knowing I was losing her in a completely different way than I'd been afraid of before. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while my brain replayed every interaction I'd had with Mia since our parents got married. All the times I'd been cold when she tried to be nice, all the guys I'd scared off without fully admitting to myself what I was doing. The truth I'd been avoiding crashed over me like a wave. I'd been so focused on not losing Mia to another guy that I'd destroyed any chance of having her in my life at all. Not as a girlfriend, not as a friend, not even as family. She'd tried so hard at first to be my sister, and I'd thrown it back in her face because I couldn't handle my own feelings. Now she was done trying, and I had no one to blame but myself. I rolled over and pulled my pillow over my head, but it didn't stop my brain from showing me all the ways I'd messed everything up. The doorbell rang around 2 the next afternoon. I opened it to find Justin standing there with his backpack, looking nervous. I forced a smile and stepped aside to let him in. My jaw hurt from clenching it, but I kept my voice steady when I offered him something to drink. He said water would be great and followed me to the kitchen. I grabbed 2 bottles from the fridge, and we made small talk about his economics class while I died inside. Mia appeared in the doorway watching us with narrowed eyes like she was waiting for me to slip up. I asked Justin about his professor and nodded along while he talked about some project on market trends. My hands stayed relaxed at my sides even though every muscle in my body wanted to tense up. Mia finally came over and suggested they get started on their studying. I told them to let me know if they needed anything and walked away before I could ruin it. They set up in the living room with textbooks spread across the coffee table. I went upstairs to my room and closed the door harder than necessary. My headphones went on immediately, volume turned up high enough to block out any sound from downstairs. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling while some playlist I didn't care about filled my ears. The effort of staying away made my chest physically ache like someone was squeezing my lungs. Every few minutes I had to stop myself from going back down there. My brain kept showing me images of them sitting close together, her laughing at something he said, maybe their hands touching while reaching for the same book. I grabbed my pillow and pressed it against my face. This was what I'd agreed to do. Be civil. Stay away. Let her have a normal afternoon with a guy who actually had a chance with her. The thoughts made me want to punch something, but I just lay there forcing myself to breathe normally. Mom and Robert came home around 6. I heard the front door open and their voices carrying up the stairs, loud and happy about their trip. They were talking over each other about the resort and some sunset they'd seen. I pulled off my headphones and went downstairs. Justin had already left. Mia was putting away the study materials while our parents set down their bags. Mom hugged me and started telling me about the spa treatments and the fancy restaurant they'd tried. Robert was showing Mia pictures on his phone. I stood there trying to look interested, but I could feel the weight of the silence between Mia and me filling the room. Mom stopped mid-sentence about the couple's massage and looked between us. Her smile faded a little. She asked if everything was okay, and Mia said yes in this flat voice. I nodded. Robert glanced at his daughter, then at me, his face shifting from vacation happiness to concern. We were standing on opposite sides of the living room, and I realized we hadn't made eye contact once since they'd walked in. Mom pulled me aside after dinner while Mia and Robert were doing dishes. We went into the den and she closed the door partway. Her voice was quiet when she asked what happened while they were gone. I told her Mia and I had a disagreement about some household stuff, keeping it vague on purpose. Mom's forehead creased and she looked at me the way she used to when I was little and lying about breaking something. She said we'd seemed tense and asked if I wanted to talk about it. I shook my head and told her it was fine. We just needed to work it out ourselves. She didn't look convinced at all. Her hand touched my shoulder and she said she was worried about both of us. I promised her everything would be okay, even though I had no idea if that was true. She sighed and hugged me before going back to help Robert finish cleaning up. The next week was terrible. Every family dinner felt like we were all pretending everything was normal, while Mia and I carefully avoided each other. We'd pass dishes without our hands touching. She'd talk about her classes, and I'd focus really hard on my food. Robert tried asking about campus stuff, and Mia would answer but never look my way. One night he asked directly if we were okay. Mia said we were fine in a tone that made it crystal clear we weren't fine at all. I just nodded and kept eating. Mom watched us with this sad, worried expression that made me feel worse than anything Mia could have said. After that dinner, Robert stopped asking and just looked disappointed whenever we were in the same room. Mia started coming home later and later. Some nights she'd walk in around 10 or 11 and go straight to her room. Mom mentioned at breakfast one morning that she missed having Mia around for dinner. She looked right at me when she said it, like she knew somehow it was my fault. I couldn't even argue because she was right. Mia was avoiding the house because I'd made it uncomfortable for her. I heard Mom and Robert talking one night through their bedroom door about whether they should intervene. Robert said maybe we just needed more time. Mom said it had been 2 years already, and things seemed to be getting worse instead of better. I went back to my room before I could hear anything else. 2 weeks after our parents got back, Mia mentioned at dinner that someone had asked her out. Her voice was casual, but her eyes flicked to me for just a second. She said his name was Kieran, and they'd met at the campus coffee shop where she studied. Mom and Robert immediately got excited asking questions about him. I gripped my fork so hard my knuckles went white. Mia described him as sweet and funny, saying they'd talked for over an hour about some book they'd both read. I managed to say that was nice, even though the words felt like they were being dragged out of me. My fork left little dents in my palm from holding it too tight. Mom was practically glowing, saying it was great that Mia was making connections and putting herself out there. Robert asked when they were going out, and Mia said Friday night. He wanted to know what Kieran studied and where he was from, and a bunch of other dad questions. Mia answered everything while I sat there wanting to leave the table but forcing myself to stay. She said Kieran was in her biology class and seemed really smart. Mom asked if we'd get to meet him, and Mia said probably. He wanted to pick her up properly. I cut my chicken into smaller and smaller pieces until it was basically shredded on my plate. Friday came too fast. I was in my room doing homework when the doorbell rang at 7. Mom called up that Kieran was here. I came downstairs because not coming down would have been too obvious. Kieran stood in the entryway wearing nice jeans and a button-up shirt. He had dark hair and an easy smile and shook Robert's hand firmly when they introduced themselves. Mom was being her usual friendly self, asking him about school. Then he turned to me and held out his hand. I shook it and felt how confident his grip was. He said it was nice to meet Mia's brother. I hated him immediately, even though he'd done absolutely nothing wrong. He was polite and well-dressed and clearly making an effort to impress our parents. Everything about him was exactly what any parent would want for their daughter. Mia came down the stairs wearing a dress I'd never seen before, and Kieran's whole face lit up. They said goodbye and left together. I watched through the window as he opened the car door for her. After they drove away, I went straight to my room. I closed the door and sat on my bed with my head in my hands. Everything I'd been holding back for weeks crashed over me at once. The grief of losing something I never actually had in the first place. The anger at the universe for making our parents meet and fall in love and ruin everything. The self-loathing for every mean thing I'd said to Mia, every time I'd pushed her away, every guy I'd scared off. I'd spent 2 years making her life miserable because I couldn't handle my own feelings. Now she was out with someone who could actually be with her the right way. Someone who wasn't her stepbrother. Someone who hadn't spent years being cruel to her. I lay back on my bed and stared at the ceiling, feeling like my chest was caving in. The worst part was knowing I deserved all of it. I stayed in my room the rest of the night but couldn't stop hearing their voices through the floor. Mom laughed at something Robert said, that bright, happy sound she made when she was truly content. They talked about Kieran for what felt like hours, how polite he seemed, how Mia's face lit up when he arrived. Robert said something about hoping this meant Mia was finally settling in and feeling at home here. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I'd been so focused on my own misery that I never considered how my behavior made Mia feel in her own house. She'd tried so hard those first months to make this work, to be my sister, and I'd thrown it all back in her face. Now she was finding happiness with someone else because I'd made sure she couldn't find it here with me as family. I pressed my pillow over my head, but the guilt didn't go away. The next morning, I saw Leo Fontana heading toward the library between classes. We'd done a group project together freshman year in some general education requirement I barely remembered. He was a psychology major, quiet but easy to talk to, the kind of person who actually listened instead of just waiting for his turn to speak. I caught up to him near the entrance and asked if he wanted to grab coffee sometime. He looked surprised but said sure, maybe after his last class today. We agreed to meet at the campus coffee shop at 4. I got there early and grabbed a table in the back corner where we wouldn't be overheard. Leo showed up right on time carrying a backpack covered in patches from different bands. He ordered some complicated drink with extra shots and sat down across from me. I stirred my plain coffee and tried to figure out how to start this conversation. He waited patiently, not pushing, just present. Finally, I told him I was having trouble adjusting to having a stepsister. The words felt inadequate, but it was a place to begin. He nodded and asked what specifically was difficult about it. Not in a therapist way, just genuinely curious. I explained that we'd known each other from campus before our parents got together, and now everything felt weird and complicated. He asked how I'd handled it so far, and I admitted I'd been kind of cold to her, maybe too cold. He listened to all of it without interrupting or judging. Then I made myself say the harder part. I told him I was struggling with seeing her date people, that it bothered me more than it probably should. Leo took a sip of his coffee and looked at me thoughtfully. He said that wasn't really a typical sibling reaction, was it? The way he phrased it as a question instead of an accusation made it easier to hear, but also impossible to deny. I felt my face get hot and stared down at my cup. He asked gently if maybe the feelings I had for her weren't exactly brotherly. I couldn't make myself say yes out loud, but I didn't say no either. He leaned back in his chair and said he got it. That sounded really complicated and painful. No judgment in his voice, just understanding. It made something loosen in my chest that had been tight for months. We sat there for a minute in silence that didn't feel awkward. Then Leo said I might need to talk to someone professional about untangling these feelings, especially since the family situation wasn't going to change. He said it kindly but firmly, like he knew I needed to hear it even if I didn't want to. Say it. I asked if he thought I was messed up and he shook his head. He said feelings don't make you messed up, it's what you do with them that matters. Right now, I was hurting myself, and probably Mia too by not dealing with this. He suggested the campus counseling center, said they were good and confidential. I promised I'd think about it even though we both knew I needed to do more than think. We finished our coffee, and he told me to text him if I needed to talk again. Walking back to my car, I felt lighter somehow, like admitting it out loud to someone neutral had released some of the pressure. That Friday, Mia went on her second date with Kieran. This time it was a group thing with his brother Tyler and some other friends from their biology class. She mentioned it at dinner, describing the plan to see some new action movie and get food after. Mom asked which movie and Mia told her, sounding genuinely excited. I focused on cutting my chicken into precise pieces and tried not to react. When Mia came home around 11, I was in the kitchen getting water. She walked in still smiling, telling Mom about the movie and how funny Tyler was and how Kieran's friends were all really nice. Mom asked questions and Mia answered happily, animated in a way I hadn't seen her in months. I stood there holding my water glass feeling like I was disappearing, becoming invisible in my own house. She didn't even glance my way as she described the restaurant they'd gone to and how Kieran had insisted on paying for her meal. I went back upstairs before they finished talking. The weeks crawled by with me going through the motions of classes and homework while everything inside felt heavy. I stopped hanging out with my own friends, stopped going to the campus events I used to enjoy. Mom noticed, but I kept telling her I was fine, just busy with school. She didn't believe me. A month after our parents got back from their trip, she sat me down in the living room on a Saturday morning. Robert had taken Mia to the mall for some shopping trip. Mom said she'd noticed I seemed depressed lately, that I wasn't acting like myself. She asked if something was wrong, if I wanted to talk about it. I told her it was nothing, just stress from classes, but my voice cracked on the words. She put her hand over mine and said the campus had counseling services. Would I be willing to talk to someone there? The concern in her eyes made it impossible to keep refusing. I agreed and watched relief wash over her face. Mom set up the appointment that afternoon, calling the counseling center and getting me scheduled for Wednesday at 3. She looked lighter after making the call, like she'd been carrying my problems on her shoulders and could finally do something about it. Robert came home with Mia and overheard Mom telling me about the appointment. He offered to drive me there, said he had a meeting on campus that day anyway and could drop me off. I wanted to refuse, but that would have been too obvious, so I thanked him. He smiled and squeezed my shoulder, trying to be supportive, and I felt terrible for resenting his kindness. He was a good guy, a good father to Mia, and a good stepfather to me. None of this was his fault. Wednesday arrived too fast. Robert drove me to campus and dropped me off outside the counseling building. He said he'd be back in an hour and to text if I needed more time. I walked inside and checked in at the front desk. The waiting room had comfortable chairs and calming artwork on the walls, clearly designed to make people feel less anxious. It didn't work. A woman came out after a few minutes and introduced herself as my counselor. She had kind eyes and led me back to a small office with a couch and some plants. I sat down and she asked what brought me in today. I talked around the issue for 40 minutes, mentioning stress and family adjustment and general college anxiety. She listened patiently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, clearly waiting for me to get to the real problem. Finally, she asked directly if my family situation involved complicated feelings about my stepsister. The question hung in the air between us, and I realized I couldn't keep avoiding this. I had to start being honest with someone. I admitted I'd had feelings for Mia before our parents got married. The words came out quiet and ashamed, but I made myself say them. The counselor didn't react with shock or judgment, just nodded and asked how I'd been handling that. I described my behavior over the past 2 years, the coldness and the mean comments and scaring off guys she liked. Saying it all out loud made me see how destructive I'd been. I'd hurt Mia repeatedly because I couldn't deal with my own emotions like an adult. The counselor asked if I'd told anyone else about this, and I mentioned Leo, said he'd suggested I come here. She said that was good, that I needed support to work through this. Then she asked what I wanted to happen now, what outcome I was hoping for. I didn't have a good answer because the outcome I wanted was impossible, and the reality I faced was unbearable. She talked about grief like it was something physical I'd been carrying around for 2 years. The counselor leaned forward in her chair and explained that I'd been mourning the loss of something I never actually had, which made it harder because there was no clear endpoint to the sadness. She said trying to force feelings to disappear never worked, that emotions didn't respond to logic or willpower the way we wanted them to. I sat there nodding like I understood, but really I just felt exhausted hearing it laid out so plainly. She told me the only way forward was honesty, probably with Mia, so we could figure out what kind of relationship was actually possible instead of me destroying everything while pretending to protect it. The words sat heavy in my chest during the drive home with Robert, who chatted about his meeting and asked how counseling went. I gave him vague, positive responses while staring out the window, knowing what I had to do, but having no idea how to actually do it. 3 more sessions passed over the next few weeks. Each one felt like peeling back another layer of denial, the counselor gently pushing me to admit things I'd been avoiding. She asked what I was most afraid would happen if I told Mia the truth. I said I was scared she'd hate me, that our parents would be disappointed, that I'd ruin the family they'd built together. She pointed out I was already doing all those things by keeping the secret, just in slower motion. That hit hard enough that I spent the whole drive back to campus sitting in my car in the parking lot, trying to breathe normally. Meanwhile, Mia was getting more distant every day. She'd started eating most meals at Natasha's place or grabbing food between classes. When she was home, she stayed in her room with the door closed. Mom kept asking if everything was okay between us, her voice worried and confused, and I kept lying and saying we were fine. Robert tried talking to Mia about it once, and she told him we just needed space to figure out our sibling dynamic, which was technically true, but missed the entire actual problem. One Tuesday evening, Mom texted that she and Robert were going to a late movie and wouldn't be home until 11. I was in my room attempting to study when I heard Mia come home around 7. She went straight to the kitchen, and I heard cabinet doors opening and closing, the microwave beeping. I stayed where I was, like I always did, waiting for her to go back upstairs so I could avoid another awkward non-interaction. Instead, her footsteps came down the hall and stopped outside my door. She knocked twice, firm and deliberate. I froze with my textbook open on my lap, every muscle tense. She knocked again and said my name through the door, her voice flat and tired. I couldn't pretend I wasn't there, so I told her to come in. She opened the door but didn't step inside, just stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't been sleeping well. She said we needed to talk because she couldn't keep living like this, coming home every day to a house that felt hostile. She said she was tired of feeling unwelcome in her own home, and she needed to know what I had against her, what she'd done that was so terrible I couldn't stand being in the same room. Her voice cracked on the last part, and I felt something break loose in my chest. I closed my textbook and set it aside, my hands shaking slightly. I told her she was right. We needed to talk, and she deserved the truth. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, making it difficult to breathe normally. She must have seen something in my face because her expression shifted from angry to uncertain. She came into the room and sat down in my desk chair, as far from me as possible while still being in the same space. She looked guarded and exhausted at the same time, her shoulders tight with tension. I realized there was no going back from what I was about to say, that everything would change the moment the words left my mouth. The silence stretched between us while I tried to figure out where to start. How to explain 2 years of terrible behavior without making excuses. She waited, watching me with this mix of frustration and something that might have been hope that I hadn't completely destroyed our chance at any kind of relationship. I started by telling her I knew her before our parents met. Her eyebrows pulled together in confusion, and I clarified that she sat in front of me in organic chemistry during sophomore year. I watched her face as she tried to remember, saw the moment recognition started to dawn. She said she remembered someone behind her, someone who always had a pen ready when she turned around. I nodded and kept going because stopping now would make it worse. I told her she wore a yellow headband on Tuesdays and borrowed pens she didn't actually need, and I'd noticed everything about her for an entire semester. Her expression changed as the pieces started connecting, understanding spreading across her face along with something that looked like shock. She asked how long I'd noticed her, and I admitted it was the whole semester, that I'd spent weeks working up the courage to talk to her like a normal person instead of just handing over pens and hoping she'd somehow read my mind. I forced myself to continue before I lost my nerve completely. I told her I was planning to ask her out after finals that year, that I'd been building up courage for months and had this whole plan worked out. Then our parents met, and everything changed overnight, and I didn't know how to handle having the person I had feelings for suddenly become my sister. The words came out rushed and messy, but I got them all out, watching her process each sentence. She sat completely still for a long moment, her face cycling through different emotions too fast for me to track. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet and careful. She asked why I was so mean to her if I had feelings, why I'd made her feel rejected and unwelcome for 2 whole years. I explained that I was trying to kill those feelings by pushing her away, that I thought if I could make myself not care about her, then everything would be easier. I admitted it was incredibly stupid and hurtful, and I knew that now, but at the time I couldn't think of any other way to deal with it. I told her I was sorry for every cruel thing I'd done, for taking down her decorations and ignoring her attempts at friendship and making her question what she'd done wrong when she'd done nothing wrong at all. Mia stared at me for another long moment, and then tears started rolling down her face. I felt terrible watching her cry, started to apologize again, but she held up her hand to stop me. She said she wasn't sad, she was angry. Her voice got louder as she talked, 2 years of hurt pouring out all at once. She was angry that I made her feel rejected and unwanted instead of just being honest from the start. Angry that I'd scared off guys she might have actually liked, guys who could have been good for her. Angry that I made her question herself constantly, wondering what was wrong with her that her own stepbrother couldn't stand to be around her. She said she'd spent months thinking she was the problem, that she was too much or too annoying or trying too hard. She'd pulled back from trying to build a family relationship because I made her feel like her presence was a burden, and now she was finding out it was all because I couldn't deal with my own feelings like an adult. She was crying harder now, but her voice stayed strong and angry, every word landing like a punch to my chest. I apologized over and over, the words spilling out desperate and useless. I told her she was right about everything, that I'd been selfish and cruel, and I understood if she never forgave me. She cut me off and said sorry wasn't enough, that I couldn't just apologize and expect everything to be okay. She said I'd damaged our relationship and our family dynamic because I couldn't be honest about my own emotions. I'd made her feel unwanted in her own home, made her doubt herself, scared away people who cared about her, all because I was too scared to admit the truth. She said she deserved better than that, deserved a brother who actually acted like family instead of someone who treated her like an inconvenience. She was right, and I knew it. Could feel the truth of every accusation settling into my bones. There was nothing I could say to make any of it better, no explanation that would undo 2 years of hurt. I sat there taking it because it was the least I could do after everything I'd put her through. Mia wiped her face with her sleeve and stood up from the chair. She said she needed time to process everything and didn't want to talk to me for a while. She was going to stay at Natasha's for a few days and would tell our parents we had a fight about household stuff, something vague that wouldn't require details. She said I needed to respect her space completely, no texts or calls or attempts to explain further. She needed to figure out how she felt about all of this without me trying to influence her thinking. I nodded and told her I understood, that I'd give her whatever space she needed for as long as she needed it. She looked at me one more time, her expression unreadable, and then left my room. I heard her go into her bedroom and start packing a bag, drawers opening and closing, the closet door sliding. 20 minutes later, she came back downstairs and I heard the front door open and close. Her car started in the driveway, and then the sound faded as she drove away. I sat alone in my room for a while, not moving, just staring at the wall. Then I went downstairs and the house felt different, emptier in a way that had nothing to do with Mia physically being gone. I sat on the couch in the living room where we'd had awkward family movie nights and tense dinners, feeling the full weight of what I'd done settling over me. The confession had brought some relief, finally saying out loud what I'd been hiding for 2 years. But it also felt like the final death of any fantasy I'd been holding on to, the absolute end of any possibility that things could be different. I'd spent so long imagining scenarios where Mia somehow felt the same way, where our parents' marriage didn't matter, where we could figure something out. Saying everything out loud made me see how impossible and wrong all of it was, how much damage I'd caused chasing something that was never going to happen. I let myself cry for the first time in years, sitting alone in the empty house while the sky got dark outside. The tears felt like they were coming from somewhere deep and old. Grief for the relationship I'd wanted and the one I'd destroyed, for the person I'd hurt and the family dynamic I'd poisoned. I cried until I was exhausted and hollow, and even then I knew it wasn't enough to make up for anything I'd done. I stayed in my room for hours after Mia left, sitting on my bed with my back against the wall and my knees pulled up to my chest. The house felt too quiet without her in it, like the air itself had changed. I heard Mom's car pull into the driveway around 8 that evening, then Robert's truck a few minutes later. They were laughing as they came through the front door, talking about something funny that happened at the resort. Their voices got quieter when they realized how silent the house was. Mom called my name, and I heard her footsteps on the stairs. She knocked on my door and asked if I was okay, her voice already worried. I told her to come in and she opened the door slowly, taking in my red eyes and the way I was sitting. She asked where Mia was, and I could see her trying to figure out what had happened just from looking at my face. I explained that Mia and I had a serious talk about our relationship, and she needed some space to process everything. Mom sat down on the edge of my bed and asked what kind of talk. What did I mean by our relationship? I kept it vague, saying we'd finally been honest about why things had been so tense between us, and it was complicated. Robert appeared in the doorway looking concerned, asking if Mia was okay and where she was staying. I told them she went to stay with a friend from her dorm for a few days, and that she was safe, just needed time. Mom kept asking questions, wanting details, but I said Mia should be the one to explain when she was ready. Robert looked at Mom, and they had one of those silent parent conversations where they communicate without words. Mom asked if I was okay, and I nodded even though I wasn't, and she hugged me for a long time without saying anything else. 3 days felt like 3 weeks. I went to classes but barely paid attention, spent most of my time staring at my phone waiting for a text that never came. Mom and Robert kept asking if I'd heard from Mia, and I had to keep saying no, watching them get more worried each day. On the 3rd night, I was sitting in the living room pretending to do homework when I heard a car in the driveway. Mia came through the front door carrying her bag, looking tired but determined. She said she needed to talk to all of us together and asked if Mom and Robert could come downstairs. They appeared within seconds, clearly relieved to see her but also nervous about what was coming. We all sat in the living room, me on one couch, Mom and Robert on the other, Mia in the chair between us. She took a deep breath and started explaining that I'd been having trouble adjusting to her as a sister because of some feelings I had before our parents got married. She kept it vague but honest, not giving specific details about the crush or how long it lasted. Mom's face went through about 5 different expressions in 10 seconds. Robert just looked confused at first, then understanding started to dawn. Mia said she wanted them to know because the tension had been affecting the whole family, and we needed to work through it properly. She made it clear this wasn't anyone's fault, just a complicated situation that required honesty. Mom and Robert sat there processing for what felt like forever. Robert finally spoke, saying this explained a lot of the tension he'd noticed over the past 2 years. He asked what we needed from them to move forward, his voice careful and measured. Mia said she needed them to know the situation was complicated and that we were working on it, that we needed their support, but also their patience. Mom asked if I was okay, and I nodded, not trusting my voice. She looked at Mia and asked if she was okay, and Mia said she was processing, but she'd be fine. Robert said they'd do whatever we needed, whether that was space or help or just understanding. Mom suggested maybe we should talk to someone professional about this, that family therapy might help us figure out how to move forward. Mia looked at me, and I looked back, and we both nodded at the same time. Robert said he'd make some calls and find someone good, that this was important, and we'd handle it together as a family. Over the next few weeks, we started going to family therapy every Tuesday evening. The counselor's office had beige walls and comfortable chairs and smelled like lavender. The first session was painful, everyone tiptoeing around the actual issue until the counselor asked direct questions that forced us to be honest. Mia and I had to learn how to talk to each other without all the anger and hurt getting in the way. We did exercises about setting boundaries and communicating needs and rebuilding trust from nothing. It was awkward as hell, sitting there with our parents while talking about feelings I'd hidden for years. But slowly, session by session, things started to shift. I learned to see Mia as an actual person instead of this fantasy I'd built up, and she learned that my coldness had never been about her being unworthy. Mom and Robert learned how to support us without trying to fix everything, just being there while we figured it out. Mia kept dating Kieran and would mention him sometimes in therapy, testing whether I could handle it. The first few times I felt that familiar jealousy spike, but I practiced what the counselor taught me about acknowledging feelings without acting on them. One day Mia showed me a photo of her and Kieran at some campus event, and I managed to say they looked happy together without my voice catching. She smiled at me like I'd just passed some kind of test. The counselor said we'd probably never be super close, that some damage takes years to heal if it heals at all. But we could be family in a real way, if we were both willing to try, to keep showing up and being honest even when it was uncomfortable. Some days were harder than others, days when I'd see Mia laugh at something on her phone and feel that old ache, but I was finally being honest with myself and everyone else. It felt like the first step towards something better, even if it wasn't what I originally wanted. I was learning to let go of the fantasy and accept the reality, to be grateful for what was possible instead of mourning what never could be.